All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Move. Today I'm being joined by Gus Olds, who is currently residing in the UK, and he's here today. We're going to talk about his story, and I'm sure we'll get into more particularly your brand called the Rider Movement.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Gus.
No, thanks for having me, mate. As I said, kind of off camera, I've been following you guys for ages, and it's been awesome to see your guys' journey. So, no, privilege to be on here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's kind of a deep cut. I'm always when you messaged me that and you're like, "Oh yeah, I've been following you guys for a while." I don't really imagine this ever as like something people listen to. Every now and then I'll have like a family friend or a cousin or something like that be like, "Oh, I listened to your show." I'm like, "Oh, that's great." But then you meet people kind of out in the real world that listen, especially someone like you. Because every now and then I'll get like, "Oh, I listened to uh your episode with blah 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 famous person," but to be more familiar with the show from the get go, that's pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you guys got a fair following out here in the UK, and obviously there's a bit of a Western scene here, and there's a few of us that are really into the bridle horse thing. And with some of the early guests you had on that were kind of that ilk, it was a natural place for us to kind of defer to.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's always interesting when I see the numbers because I'd say I think like 8% of our total listening is from the UK,
Yeah,
which in terms of ratios of population versus how many people listen to our podcast, 8% is a giant portion of if you compare like the UK population to the US population, or we're pretty big in Australia and New Zealand as well. Um,
yeah, believe it.
so that
I
that's
kind of get the
cool.
same verse in verse with some of my stuff, as in if I look at the analytics, increasingly it's the stuff I'm doing now. I get more and more kind of interaction with people from the States, which I always think is interesting. And yeah, Australia as well. Australia is just like a random kind of intersection for all of this somehow.
Oh yeah. Well, in my experience, uh if you're doing anything that's impacting American pop culture in any way, even if it's like in the horse world, you're gonna start affecting Australian pop culture because they
Yeah,
just
sure.
get so much from the United States. Um, at least that was my experience from the time spent in Australia. They have their own unique culture for sure, but especially things like the horse world, it's like something happens in America and then it will trickle over to Australia and then they'll put their own spin on it somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I know the cutting's getting really big over there.
Yeah, cutting and I'm every time I look, it seems like their cow horse is getting a little bigger, and even the stuff they've got going on. Like you look at the camp drafts now,
Yeah,
uh, you look at the pedigrees of those horses, and it's very, very legitimate performance horse lines that are in that sport now. You know,
yes, sir.
you'll have Metallic Cats and Stevie Ray Vaughns and stuff like that. Uh, being brought into I don't know how the Australian stock horse breed book works exactly, but yeah, their horse flesh over there is getting more legit all the time, no matter what sport they're using it for. Yeah. So cool. But you're in the UK right now. But before we started recording, you said you're originally from Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so just kind of going back on a tangent to what you said about the Aussie thing. So yeah, I grew up in Zimbabwe. Ran a cattle and safari ranch down there, and had dad was a horseman, so dad was mounted special forces. He would have been one of the last humans, I think, to go into battle on horseback, which was
Mm.
a pretty cool inference to have into a lot of his expectations of the horses that we grew up with. Those horses needed to be broke, man, to do that. And you're literally putting your life in their hands or their hooves, as it might be. And so, yeah, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and then people always think I've got an Aussie accent because I've spent a fair bit of time in polo and
Hmm.
mucking around with the Australians. I think it's just a pretty easy accent to pick up.
Oh, 100%. Man, I studied abroad and I was in Australia for 6 months, and then it took me like 3 months back in the United States to kick all the nasally Aussie stuff I'd picked up.
Yeah. There's some beautiful phrases though that I kind of find stuck in my vernacular that come up now and again. That yeah, there's no better phrase for some of the Aussie ones.
Oh, yeah. As a culture, I don't think anyone can turn a phrase better than the Australians for sure. I would agree with you on
Yeah, the expletives are probably a bit heavy for this podcast, but some of the other some of the other phrases.
that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, talk a little bit about that. Like, you know, Australia, the United States, even the UK to quite an extent. When someone says I grew up in horses, there's quite a defined horse culture there. Obviously, the American cowboy, the Australian outback drover. Uh, that in the UK, you can think of someone, fox hunting or doing, one of the Olympic disciplines or playing polo or something like that. Uh, and I know, and I've heard of several people coming from the African continent that they're like, yeah, I grew up with horses. But to me, there's not a particular image in my mind's eye of someone grows up in Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, countries like that, and like this is what a childhood with horses looks like, right? So can you talk about that a little bit? I know the people I have talked to or listened to, um, it's kind of like the classic Olympic disciplines, dressage, show jumping, eventing, kind of like you'd be exposed to in Europe. But yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So, I mean, I think a lot of that is just the environment. So, it's not actually dissimilar. I've just got back from Texas in the snaffle bit, working with a couple of people over there, and a lot of the environment around Texas, like those kind of thick mesquite, those mesquite thickets, and kind of big plains in the middle, are reminiscent of the part of Zimbabwe that I grew up in, and just we ran stock on a large scale, much like you would in those sorts of environments, and just getting to places, I think, is a big thing. So horses were, at least in my family, very much a tool. And
Hmm.
then we also do safari, and in a way that you can't get close to big game animals in a jeep or on a ATV or something like that. You can really close the distance with horses and kind of give safari clients a pretty cool experiment horseback on safari. So we do a little bit of that through dad, and just silly anecdotes growing up. Dad's favorite game was to run up behind an elephant and slap it on the butt and see who could get out of the way quickest and that sort of thing, you know, or we'd be riding back from we used to take them swimming a lot, kind of big dams and reservoirs, and be riding back from the reservoirs, and you'd under your girth and see if you could stick on without a saddle, and all kind of good character building stuff growing up. But I think the thing that really hamstrung more of an African horse culture in the traditional sense is we have African horse sickness,
Okay.
which stopped export a great deal. So there's some really good horses there, but the import export issue, and I'm not going to kind of get into too much detail, frankly, because I don't know enough about it. But I know that growing up, it was very difficult to get horses in and out of the country because of African horse sickness. Uh,
Mm.
so that kind of keeps it as its own little microclimate in that sense. But no, there's definitely a serious horse culture there. And, now and again, you see people kind of drifting over to the States and certainly over to the UK with that passion in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are kind of the ingredients for a horse climate and a horse industry. And I might butcher some of this because I've never been to Africa, but this is just kind of my understanding. And you compare it to a lot of places like the American West or Australia. You have, number one, the land to run a high volume of horses.
Yeah.
Uh, Prior to automotive invention, and even, up into, like you said, kind of your dad's era, there is somewhat of a need for horses, and I think that always helps, right? You see that in South America too, where it's one thing if you have a horse culture, and I kind of think of like I'll pick on the UK. So the UK is kind of at a point in my mind where they're outside of a small handful of exceptions. There's not like the UK could operate without horses, if that
Oh, yeah.
makes sense, right? And I'm not, and the US is not far off of that, with the exception of like some giant ranches in Nevada and Texas and things like that. But it seems like the longer you have that, the more you're going to carry on a uh, a horse culture and a horse I guess industry would be the right word, like a need to run a high volume of horses. And if you have a high volume of horses, then you're going to have people like yourself who grow up, and that's one of the things we do like as a kid, like for recreation, part of your job, all that stuff. And just the more
Yeah.
people that get exposed to it. So and that's always been like the people I know that ranch in South Africa, at least one of the selling points is there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of climate and in terms of the land that's available. Um, and then you have other things that aren't selling points, like African horse sickness or the political climate or things like that, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but it always made sense to me why that region of the world you could have a lot of people in horses. And I'd say if you probably, like we were talking about earlier, looked at the population versus what's come out of um, Africa in those countries, including yourself, there probably is a disproportional amount of people that are going on and doing things in the horse industry coming out of those African countries.
Yeah. I think. Look, I think you hit it on the head pretty well there. We're based in the UK at the moment, and when we kind of just come back from a trip around the states, and when we're in Idaho, we worked out that for every person we met in Idaho, we'd have met 62 people in the UK. If you kind
Hmm.
of on the acreage and the population down. And I think that just, that really puts land at a premium and then just takes the accessibility out of the horse game at a grassroots level. So it increasingly
Hmm.
becomes horses or almost a status symbol. And I think status symbols are just easier to hate on, you know? If it's
Sure.
something that's like everyone, like in South America, I've done a bit of work in Argentina, and everyone has a horse there. If you've got a backyard, there's a horse in it. You'll be driving down the freeway in Argentina, and there'll be guys leading a string of horses, one riding, leading four per side down the middle of the highway, and that's just normal because it's part of their culture. Whereas, yeah, I think the less availability to land there is, the more of a luxury item the horse is, and the more stigma gets attached to potentially being into horses,
Hmm.
or you sort of get labeled easier in that environment.
Yeah. Interesting. So do you feel like in the UK there's a stigma against horses, like almost like a class issue type thing?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to overstate it. There's certainly people of all classes that access horses, but I think in the UK in particular, not necessarily class, but means. You need to be of a certain means to be able to compete at a decent level with horses, and that's no different. It's
Yeah.
horses, and horse. You need to be able to pay to play to a certain extent, but we're not talking to the same extent as what it would cost you to run an operation in Europe, not just the UK, just where space is at a premium.
Yeah. See, that's interesting. I feel like we don't need to get too far down that rabbit hole. I feel like we're unpacking some things, some socio-political things about the UK. Because in my mind, at least in the US, like class and means would be kind of interchangeable. But I get what you're saying. Like I understand the difference you're trying to convey there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that makes sense. Um, so you're growing up in Zimbabwe, doing the deal. Your dad's kind of this badass horse cavalry guy. So
Yeah.
what was can you talk a little bit more specifically about what his role was, like how he was using his horse and what he was doing?
in battle
Yeah,
or just in general?
both.
So in battle, it was just a way of in that country covering big distances and inserting yourself in,
Mm-hmm.
behind enemy lines. Your special forces, so they were operating behind
Okay.
enemy lines. But and the horse in a country where the indigenous population are very very good trackers. They're very very aware of the environment, and if you drive a big old armored vehicle through there, you may as well put neon lights and sirens on it. Whereas accessing that sort of country on horseback was a means of covering big ground. So we did this growing up, which was good for my cardio, if nothing else. But if we had to cover big country to get to a cattle camp or something, and same as I referenced Texas, it's pretty hot out there. Get up Celsius or get up into the 40s, so that's above. I think it's above the hundreds. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah. No, you're right.
And we're covering big distances in that heat. So the standard drill that we were under, even as kids, was to walk 10, trot 10, walk 10, trot 10, run 10. So you'd get off your horse and run for 10 minutes next to your horse, and then get back on and walk 10, trot 10, run 10 to cover ground. And that was a legacy of the kind of cavalry that Dad had brought into everyday life. And then we had a string of kind of between 20 and 30 horses on the ranch, and we bought very few of them because at that point anyway in Africa, the kind of awareness of horsemanship, and some people take issue with this, but I think it's a pretty good broad covering for a way of dealing with horses. There was certainly none of the natural horsemanship influence in that area.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a hard way of dealing with horses, much more like it would have been, I guess, in the States 100, 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, Dad was we had a guy come over on safari who was actually a cowboy from Australia who was big into the natural horsemanship side of things, and he and Dad hit it off. And so we ended up with a string of horses that were all problem horses that people couldn't deal with, and brought to Dad, and they ended up being the ranch horses.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like a very shaping event in anyone getting exposed to horsemanship. If
Yeah,
they kind of double down on that, they're like, oh, well now the the range of horses I can buy just got so much broader because I'll just fix them.
yeah,
And I'm
uh,
not saying, I mean, I do a part of that for my living. So I'm not saying you can't fix horses by any means, but it is just funny because I have seen that a lot. People get exposed to horsemanship, and then all of a sudden the barn's full of problem horses that we're gonna fix. And it's like,
yeah.
man, I'm glad you enjoy this stuff because you just created a lot of work for yourself.
Precisely,
Yeah.
precisely. Yeah.
Cool. So with that, you're growing up doing the ranching thing. Did you use the horses for sport at all? Or were they pretty much just like get from A to B? Like you said, they're a tool to be used on the ranch.
Tool to be used on the ranch, get to A to B, and we'd work cattle, not in the sense that you work them over there, as in we'd push stock big miles.
Hmm.
It was quite a cool thing to do as a kid for probably the first 3 or 4 hours, but it's
Yeah.
very easy to romanticize a 30, 40 mile cattle drive until you're at about mile 22 and it's 42 degrees and you're at the back in the dust.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd move cattle big miles. We wouldn't use trucks. We'd use horses to move them. And then just checking stock, really, getting around and making sure that everything's not been eaten by a lion overnight. And, you know, kind of different pressures that we have in Africa in terms of the natural predator burden uh, that are pretty good at their job. So being mobile, being horseback, being able to get into little nooks and crannies to see where everything is, or see where a calf's been drugged to, or something like that, was always a useful thing to have. But no, they're very much a tool in that sense. And then it's just a bit of fun. Like Dad would teach us all the trick riding and tent pegging and all that sort of thing that he had himself in his military background.
Yeah. Awesome. Would y'all have to run pretty cagey cattle to survive in that country?
Yeah. So I just got back. Actually, this is a conversation that I think you spent a bit of time with Nick Dowers, and he was kind enough to have us out at his ranch there in Nevada. And yeah, our cattle were pretty gnarly, man. They were reminiscent of some of that desert stock you see in Nevada, just because of the pressures of the environment. Whereas the cattle there need to be super smart and super savvy in terms of the seasons and where to find feed and where to find water.
Hmm.
Ours needed to be able to find feed and water, and also we tended to go for the more, call it, aggressive breeds. So we ran a lot of, we call them Brahmin, I guess you call them Brahma,
Hmm. Yep.
and the gnarly better. We wanted a cow that was going to, go to the well to make sure her calf didn't get taken off her by a lion or a pack of wild dogs or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine so because, and there's places in the Western United States where there's still quite a bit of predator pressure, but you add all that other stuff like the heat. Uh, I'm sure there's probably some sort of like insects and parasite load that the cattle have to
Yeah.
take. And then you add predator pressure to that. And I don't know, maybe I'm hyping it up in my mind because I've never been there, but not regular predator pressure, but like Africa predator pressure, which in my mind is probably another level of predator pressure for any sort of megafauna to have to deal with. Um, yeah, I'd imagine you probably have some kind of long-eared, gnarly, cagey cattle that can are the what has to survive in that country.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just kind of funny anecdotes that go along with it. But we'd have, say, ranchers from the UK that came out, and they were good dudes. Like, I'm not throwing any shade, but I remember distinctly we'd check our cattle probably once a quarter.
Mhm.
That was the acreage. And we had a guy come up who ran some cattle over here, and there was this Brahma cow that had actually, she'd been attacked by, I think it was a leopard or something. So she was pretty riled up anyway. And she was running down the race, and he went, "Don't worry, I've got it," and stopped in the middle of the race and held his hand up and went, "Stop." And this cow just didn't even change gear, and all we saw was him kind of exit the front of the race, attached to the Brahma. And yeah, it's just it was a cool environment to grow up in. It certainly made you respectful. I think it's pretty important for humans not to be the top of the food chain everywhere they go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So, all right, Gus grows up, wild Africa, does all the cool stuff. Sounds like a fun childhood. At least you get some cool stories out of it at the very least, I imagine.
It was,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So, how do we get to today? Because now, um, I know you've spent quite a lot of time. I don't know what you would call it exactly, but maybe like the health and exercise space, right? Um, I'm sure you have a better name for it than that. So forgive me if I'm not
Oh, good.
trying to not trying to knock you down a peg or anything like that. And you also have to give me some grace because it's 6:30 in the morning where I'm at.
Yeah, so I appreciate you adjusting the time for me, Joe. Good on you.
Yeah, yeah. But you have quite a bit of experience in that world.
Yeah.
And my understanding is you used that for quite a while before you started the rider movement, but can you kind of talk about um maybe just briefly mention what you do today and then kind of go back to like how that all started in terms of your professional career?
Sure. So I'm a rider performance coach.
Okay.
I work with riders at all levels, but I've kind of got a key nucleus of pros that I use. Uh, and my job is to analyze them and make them better at their job.
Okay.
So it's an all-encompassing deal. I look at everything from nutrition to how they sit on the horse, their imbalances, their strength asymmetries. That are going to affect how they perform and how their horses perform. And then I have a small nucleus here of private clients that I do that with as well. In terms of getting there, we left Africa under some pretty awful circumstances. The government killed my father and took the ranch off us. So we arrived in the UK we actually arrived as refugees. We had to get out of there pretty quick. And when they did so, they froze all the ranch accounts and ranch assets. So we arrived with £50 hidden in the back of a picture frame because you weren't allowed to take any forex out of the country at that point. Uh, and then started to make our way here. My mother and my sister are warrior women, and we're at the helm. And don't know what I'd have done without them, but was quite lucky that I got a sporting scholarship over here. I went to a pretty good school, and then kind of fast forwarding a bit, got a bit into MMA, which I was never particularly good at. But through that fight team, I was able to do some of my training to be a strength coach, a PT, and then a strength coach. And then I got very lucky to work in a number of other sports. So I worked at a professional level in skiing and tennis, as well as a handful of other sports. And yeah, fast forwarding, I was working in London. And as you can probably have gathered from my background, I'm not really a city boy. So the pace
Mhm.
of life in London was too crazy for me. And I jumped at the opportunity when a friend of mine offered to uh, help him strength and condition his polo team, that with a view to winning the British Open, which is probably one of the top 3 or 4 tournaments in the world for polo. And we successfully did that. And I suddenly thought, hey, I'm super passionate about horses. I'm super passionate about health and strength and conditioning. I wonder if there's a way that I could put those two things together. Probably not, because that sounds like a stupid job. And, that was 15, 20 years ago, and here we are.
Heck yeah. That's awesome, man. So, I guess my first question is, what sport did you play when you went to university?
University, I played rugby, but during that time was when I was kind of leaning into the MMA a lot more. So
Gotcha.
when I say I was on a professional fight team, let's not get it twisted, okay? I wasn't kind of a UFC undercard or anything like that. About as far from that as you can get. Uh, I had a good group of guys around me that were professional fighters, and I had a kind of small sponsorship deal from a sports nutrition company that allowed me to train with them on a daily basis.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was pretty big into the MMA at that point,
That's
and
awesome.
working on my spidey skill of blocking punches with my face, as my coach would have said.
Gosh. Well, hey, man, even to do that, I know you said you weren't at the top level, but I think it's, someone who can do that and truly pursue that is a very unique type of person mentally in terms of their fortitude. Um, and I think a lot of times it takes someone who has been tough enough to go through something like what you just said, coming to another country as a refugee or something like that, um, to really even be able to make a go of that at any capacity. So, all that to say, I have a lot of respect for the fact that you did that at all in your life because um, I'd like to think I'm pretty disciplined. I'd like to think I'm pretty tough, but I know I'm not the type of person that could ever be wired to do professional fighting under any circumstances.
Hey, Joe, to be honest with you, mate, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I was that sort of individual as well. It seemed like a hell of a tough way to make a living to me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I I probably draw the line at rugby. Honestly, I've got a right shoulder that if I don't take care of it, clicks just because playing rugby. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Uh, with that, so did you study like exercise science or nutrition or anything like that in university? Is that kind of
No,
you
so
knew
my
you wanted to go that direction?
no, so I mean, I'm kind of in a privileged position now where I get to occasionally lecture to young coaches and that sort of thing. And I don't know what it's like in the States, but because I went to what's termed a public school over here, which is a private school over there, it's all kind of mixed up. But there was a hell of a lot of academic pressure.
Hmm,
So I didn't get to select what I wanted to do. I was told that because of the areas that they thought I showed some level of promise, I was basically all sciences and maths. And
hmm,
bar the kind of physics and biology side of it, I hated it. So, that kind of led me down a certain path, uh, which is potentially not the path I should have gone down. I was originally looking at being a veterinarian. But no, I studied at university kind of what in my mind at that point was a good middle ground. So I did an equine business management degree
okay.
as my
Yeah.
first. As I said, through kind of influences on that fight team, I started doing some strength and conditioning work, and or certainly some personal training work, and then realized that actually I was earning a fair bit of money, doing that, and I was in a position where I could help my family, and that to me was always far more appealing than going to university for another 5 years and not being in a position to help my family in that sense. So it was a pretty quick left shift. I then did my strength and conditioning course at a different university and showed some degree of aptitude with that. And it was a pretty easy, you know, a pretty easy thing to follow because you're getting a lot of positive reinforcement from clients, peers, athletes as to the level of aptitude you may or may not show for that given pursuit. It's always easier to be disciplined when you feel like you're good at something, I guess.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because y- a lot of times you don't have to, um, well, I'll use exercising as an example because I've been kind of thinking about this lately because we're going into the winter, and the winter time is actually when I get to exercise the most because
I'm hearing
it's
a
just,
lot from you boys. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so uh, it's kind of like whatever it is. Maybe there's an exercise I'm not very good at. Maybe I want to get better at like weighted pull-ups or something, and I'm not very good at it. Um, it will take a long time for me to ever see dividends in getting better in that relative to maybe I'm already predisposed to if I wanted to add 30 pounds to my squat, if I like took the time to do that and really focused on that, I feel like I could make those gains a lot quicker, just because of my background, how I'm built, things like that. Um, so, but it comes like that with life. Like, I don't think I'm the most talented horseman in the world by any means, but I do think I have a gift that allows me to, if I focus on that and I pursue that, I see fruit from that. And so I might not get to where I want to be, but I can see progress really quick most of the time when I pursue something to make my horsemanship better.
Yeah.
Versus other aspects of my life, um, folding laundry. I've been trying to get better at folding laundry like my entire life, and I'm still not great at it. I'm better, but I'm still not great at it. So that has been like a lifelong journey. Um, and it doesn't excite me the same way. Um, and that's probably a bad example because you don't really need talent to be good at
Man,
folding
that's a
laundry.
great
But
don't you lie to me like that, Joe. You need a hell of a lot of talent to fold laundry. Tell me what you have. Don't tell Jules. I get banned from that one on the regular, which is just fine with me.
yeah, yeah, I haven't gotten that lucky yet.
But
Yeah,
no, it's
but
saying.
yeah, yeah, and all that to say, I agree with you. If you have any sort of predisposition to be good at something, it's way easier to pursue it because you just get like the feedback loop hitting a lot quicker, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think though in the long term, I don't know if you found this, but in the long term, that can sometimes be a weakness because it takes you longer to get to the point where you're a bit more self-critical, a bit more analytical. And I suppose this is the great thing about professional sports or getting to work with some of the amazing athletes and coaches that I do is there's an authenticity to that very quickly exposes your weak areas. And,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
increasingly now, not always, but increasingly now, it's developing those weak areas that I find more rewarding. The kind of dopaminergic feedback of realizing that you're terrible at something and the kind of daily toil of addressing that, I find more and more rewarding than I certainly would have done when I was in my 20s and I just wanted to be good at stuff.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. But I do think that comes with age and perspective.
Yeah.
Um, because I've been out of my 20s for 7 months now. But I have found that,
That is.
yeah, I have found that as I kind of professionally and just me as an adult, if I could call it like my body of work as an adult, as a functioning human being on my own. As that grows, I gain more perspective on, oh, okay, I couldn't see at the time how I was chipping away at this, but now over like a 4-year span, I chipped away at this and got better at whatever it was, professional, private life, whatever it was. Um, and so then you kind of have that to lean back on. It's like, okay, well, now maybe I come to this next thing that I'm not very good at or not predisposed to being good at. But I do have evidence that I can chip away at things and at least get some level of better, even if I'm not going to be the Michael Jordan of folding laundry one day.
Sure. And do you feel like that again kind of feeds back into what we are saying about that positive feedback loop?
Hmm.
Once you start to realize that, and once you start to realize that actually, and I say this to my athletes, it's such a boring thing to say, but it's true. The single biggest contributing factor to as to whether you're going to be successful or not is consistency. You are better off showing up every day in service of trying to get better and doing a pretty average job than you are showing up once a week and doing a great job.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Do you know who Nick Saban is?
Yeah, yeah, the coach. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Hmm. Yeah. So Nick Saban, he's probably my favorite guy to listen to uh in in terms of like any speaker. Um Not a fan of the University of Alabama football, so it got a lot easier to listen to him once he retired.
Yeah,
But uh he has a saying that I really like. Um he talked about he was at his family's house that was on the beach there when he was coaching the Miami Dolphins. And the guys came in to install the windows, and he said, "Well, you need the toughest windows," because he's talking about toughness. He's like, "Okay, well, how do you know these are the toughest windows?" And he said, "Well, we measure what it takes to break them." And
yeah,
he said, "How tough are you? Like, what does it take to break you?" And he's talking about this. I think a lot of it is in reference to the routine and the habits that you've built, right? So, like, if you're a football player at a high level, like the guys he's talking to, you've got to be super consistent and super disciplined in pretty much everything you do in your life because it's just so competitive. It's the only way to succeed. And he's like, okay, does it just take one play to mentally break you, and then mentally you're gone for the rest of the game? Does it? What does it take to break your concentration? And I think about that a lot because to me, that is tied hand in hand with consistency. So if you're going to exercise or you're going to, ride horses or you're going to do whatever, what does it take to break you? Does it take, oh, I hit my alarm twice and now I don't have time to do that? Like, is that what it takes to break you from your habit? Um, does it take just someone making an offhand comment or cutting you off in traffic and then you're in a bad mood, you don't feel like doing whatever it is you need to do to get better? And so that's been fresh on my mind lately, is really defining toughness, not as maybe being like a big macho MMA guy, but there's a lot of people who are super super consistent in whatever they do, and you can't really outwardly see how tough they are, but they are really tough mentally because things happen in their life and they just keep to that consistency.
yeah. And I never ended up joining the military, but I ended up doing a couple of reasonably tough military selections in this country, and it was always surprising to me that it was never the guy that was the most physically gifted or the most suave or had the best chat on day one or anything like that. It was kind of, they talk about it over here as the gray man, but that was always, something that stayed with me from that experience in terms of, you know, real toughness is not a loud thing. Some of the
Hmm.
toughest people I know, my mother, for example, with the level of adversity she's been through. My mother's disabled, 5'1", on sticks and has had to move her family single-handedly from a African country to a culture that she knows nothing about. And then I was in a coma that she kind of nursed me through that I wasn't supposed to come out of. All these sorts of levels of adversity that she's had to face, and she is the smiliest, happiest, most positive, unassuming person you ever meet. You'd never ever know the depth of toughness that lady has. And I kind of think it goes back to a level of authenticity, right? Some people are just born tough, but I do think there's a certain level of, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And
Yeah.
there's you get put in positions of adversity, and it's sink or swim. And once you swum in a position where you face that level of adversity, everything else just doesn't seem to affect those people as much. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And it's the old, it's not corny because it does matter, but it comes up on this show a lot, right? Because it's a horse and horsemanship podcast. So to relate this all back to horses, it's like starting a cult where in the beginning, you might have a colt that's super touchy, bothered by everything. Um, and then, after you get a couple rides on it and that colt goes and does a hard day's work and then maybe has to spend 4 hours by itself tied to a hitching rail or something where it thinks the world's going to end and then the world doesn't end. And then it gets, brushed and fed and life goes on. And we just go do the same thing tomorrow. All of a sudden, that colt's not so spooky anymore.
Yeah,
And it's not that you spent time working on all the things that spook the colt. It's just now it's confident that it can go through the fire a little bit and come out the other side.
absolutely. One of my best mates in this country is a horseman, probably one of the best horsemen in this country. I'm very fortunate to have as an ally when I run into a problem, a guy called Sean Coleman. And his kind of main deal is with all of his young horses, all of his colts, all of his problem horses, is teaching horses that pressure is information.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
something I try and I can't I kind of hate when people do this, like trying to equate every lesson in life to a horse trading scenario. But I think in
Yeah.
that particular perspective, from that particular perspective, it's not a bad one in terms of, you know, if I am under pressure, if things aren't going the way they should be with a certain athlete or, you know, XYZ finals coming up, what is that pressure telling you about your program? What is that pressure telling you about your preparation? What is that pressure telling you about things that you could have done better or can do better while under that pressure? And it's something that, goes through my mind a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm with you, man. Maybe it's because I've done these podcasts so much, but it's like we don't have to make everything about, well, this is like that one time in the round pen when blah 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 blah. Um, but that's kind of it right there. Like if you can get horses thinking, I I like the term. I think Trevor Brazil used it. Was maybe the first time I ever heard it. But just kind of show them how to walk through the fire a little bit,
Yeah,
not panic, but just walk through the fire. Um, and the way I like how your friend phrased it, you have to be able to think, like start turning your brain on when the pressure comes, not turn your brain off when the pressure comes.
yeah,
So see that pressure as information to respond to, not pressure to react to. If you can do that with horses, man, there's a lot of other things you got to learn, in terms of the mechanical side, and just learn how to be their friend and things like that. But if you can teach horses to do that, it's going to save you a lot of heartache with horses.
Oh man, and that's something that amazes me. I'm so privileged to work with some amazing athletes, both human and equine, and even at the highest level in certain sports, these horses are operating and they are doing some stuff. But mentally, not once have these horses been taught how to deal with pressure as information, and they're they're operating at a high level, but mentally they are completely checked out. And there comes a point when, if you don't have that mental side, no matter how gifted the horse is, something's going to come awry, you know?
100%. Well, I tell our clients it's no different than a professional athlete. You know, if you've got a football player, baseball player, or whatever sport, and they're starting their career at the professional level and they're super gifted and they're awesome, like they're gonna probably have a good couple of years, but they're not gonna like they're on borrowed time if in every other aspect of their life they don't kind of have it together mentally, right? You know, maybe there's an addiction or maybe uh they're running around, you know, gambling, womanizing, doing all these other things. Like you'll have a great career um for a time, but it will be very hard to have long-term sustained success without the right mental approach to that. And you see it in sports a lot. And I
Yeah,
mean, there are exceptions, but even the exceptions, it's just their talent allowed them a longer amount of time before there was some sort of crash, for
yeah.
lack
I
of a
mean,
better term.
this is something I talk to my athletes about a lot. My whole shtick in terms of my programming for equestrian athletes, riders is resilience, right?
Mhm.
And across the levels, from a microscopic viewpoint to a macroscopic viewpoint, meaning, you know, talking about pressures, information. If you haven't loaded a joint in the body and taught that joint how to deal with that situation and how to extricate itself from that situation, that's when injuries happen. You know, if you haven't overproofed and built a body that's overproofed to what you're going to ask it to do and deal with those pressures, that's when injuries are going to happen. And I think, you know, the mental resilience side of things is important from a day-to-day perspective and training, but also, you know, the thing I hope to be able to give any of my athletes who make their living on horseback is longevity, man. You know,
Yeah.
single worst thing for your bank balance is retiring 10 years early because your back's bad or your knee's bad or whatever it might be. And if you can teach that, you know, joint by joint basis or body by body basis, or the mental capacity to deal with adversity and learn from it what you can early on, then career longevity and career enjoyment goes through the roof as much as anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I've tried, I think more than most people my age, I try to really prioritize the physical side of taking care of myself in the horse training deal. Um, but I was fortunate enough, you know, I grew up the son of a trainer and I grew up pretty much it was my parents and other horse trainers that raised me. Like if I think about the people I was around from a young age,
Great deal.
um, and a lot of them had physical ailments, you know, starting in their 40s that only got worse, right? Um, and it was just, I mean, it was a different time, different era. There was different information available, but I saw that from an early age. I was like, daggone, I'm one, just period, from a human lifestyle standpoint, no matter, even if I work a desk job, I got to take care of myself. Uh, but two, when I made the decision to make a living with my body and train horses, and now support my family that way, I'm like, this is like the number one investment I can make, really, is in my body. And I'm like everyone else. I struggle to stay disciplined all the time. You know, I'm not an unbreakable window. I have things that break me, and then I don't know, you know, go off diet for a couple days or whatever it is. But I'm a lot less breakable than I was, and that that to me, I think is so important. And it was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here because I think it's so interesting. At the top level now it exists, but generally speaking, as an industry, we as horse trainers use our body to make a living. And there's a lot of trainers that are probably some of the worst people about taking care of themselves,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
100%. And look, it's a cultural thing, and it's a culture for which I have a great deal of respect. But slowly is changing, and this has been when I first started in polo, I was like one of the only trainers attached to a polo team, and you know, it was almost a joke among the others. They'd see opposition teams would see you warming up and start like mimicking your warm up and start messing around to like take the piss out of the guys you were training. And then when I first started in dressage, people would warm up but would have to hide in the back of the truck so no one could see you warming up. And now those industries all have trainers for all of their disciplines. And the exciting thing for me with some of the Western performance industry is actually that hasn't really taken on yet. So on the one hand, man, I wish I could have gotten to some of the pros I've gotten to work with, certainly the older pros, earlier, because there were a lot of issues that they're experiencing now, say back trouble or knee trouble, that's really affecting their career and their performance. You're like, man, that was an avoidable thing
Hmm.
10 years ago. And we can still help you a lot, but it's a lot more work now. But the most exciting part of that is actually, some of the pros top of the game now that I've been privileged to work with over the last few months, man, they are hungry. And I increasingly see the Western industry as somewhere where the stuff that I do is going to be more and more common. And I hope that's the case. I hope that there's some seriously good trainers that are looking at this industry and going, man, this is an area that I can make a big difference, because it's such an amazing sport and it's such an amazing community. It deserves that. And the biggest issue that I've faced across equestrian disciplines, having come from other professional sports, is that equestrian pros, so horse trainers, struggle to see themselves as athletes.
Hmm.
And I have this conversation with them a lot. I'm like, okay, so you earn your money day to day using your body. That is your main tool of earning. It's not like you're going to go sit at a desk and trade some stocks and then retire at 45. You need to be horseback, or at least able to be horseback in order to earn a living. And that's where you're getting your paycheck from. So if you're not an athlete, what are you?
Hmm.
And increasingly, I think, that's something I really try and instill with the people I work with is you need to treat yourself as an athlete from the bottom up. And that doesn't mean you need to be on some crazy, I don't know if you saw that reel that went viral a little while ago of the dude like 4 a.m. putting his face in a load of ice and then running 20 miles and then getting his personal chef and all that BS. It just means that you need to have a working knowledge of how your body works and interacts with the horse,
Hmm.
and a base knowledge of nutrition, because as boring as it is, that's where the real dividends get paid in the future. If you can have a
Hmm.
base understanding of what fuels your body for what sort of work, you can not only avoid a load of inflammation and systemic issues that might come later on, but you can also avoid disease, illness, and potentially short-term, just not being on your game when you need to be on game day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the nutrition part of things, because I'm still, again, I'm 30 years old now, but I felt like, especially in my late teens, early 20s, I was I was one of these people, and I was around a lot of people, a lot of guys. They'll work out, and man, you really cannot exercise your way out of bad nutrition. It's like literally impossible, even though I've seen so many people try.
Look, I was one of them, right?
Yeah.
And
I think a lot of men were.
yeah, because guys are worried about looking massive
Mhm,
primarily,
mhm.
and it makes us a lot less scared of calories. Whereas, and thank goodness this is changing. The new skinny, but girls traditionally were worried about being skinny, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I did the same thing as you do. I spent my 20s trying to be shredded and massive and wondering why I was just fat, like better educated. And that's just a purely cosmetic thing. But when it comes to, kind of bring it back into some of the Western sports, when it comes to, if you're going down the fence on a cow or you're cutting a cow, your reaction time needs to be on point because you don't have to miss by much to just miss, right? And if, once you look into seeing what poor insulin sensitivity from, say, overconsumption of sugar or carbohydrates does to your reaction time in a sport that is largely cognitive, that's kind of the data I like to show people and be like, listen, I will show you your reaction time get worse when your insulin load is worse, And that's a
Mm.
pretty easy thing to get people to buy into once they've seen it.
Wow. Okay. So we've kind of been dancing around it, but I want to. This is a term I use. I don't know if you'll understand it given where you're from, but to get a little bit more inside baseball on the whole thing.
Yeah, I
So,
got you.
like when I was a kid, inside baseball was this thing that would come on ESPN, and it was like, this is how so and so like throws his slider, and it was like the most technical explanation of sport that you'd ever heard, right? And it was like that every week.
Yeah.
Um, so I use that expression a lot, but my wife has told me I should look for other expressions because some
No,
people
I'm
get
with
it.
you. Got it.
Yeah. um, so when you're going into this, let you are dealing with people who are very good at what they do,
Hmm.
a lot of the times. But like if we're being perfectly honest, I'll use the I don't know. We could use the Olympics, like where they have like all the different Olympians lined up, and they got like the gymnast next to the swimmer, next to like the power lifter, next to the wrestler and all that stuff. And it's like, look at all the body types like at the Olympics, right? Um, Generally speaking, if they have the equestrian, they look like a very average person.
Yeah.
Um, and there are a lot of people who are elite at what they do, especially in the Western performance horse world.
Yeah.
But if you took the boots and the cowboy hat off of them, they would look like the guy picking their kid up from soccer. And they
They look
just
like a
like,
frog wearing suspenders. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they just look like a guy. So it's, to me, it's kind of a different deal than I'm coming in here to help the linebacker room for the New England Patriots or something. Like when
Yeah.
the guys walk around on the street and you're like, I bet that guy's a professional athlete, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so it is different. And like how do you go about coming in and addressing that? Because I bet you do other sports like the rugby or the MMA, someone in your shoes would come in and they're already talking to someone who's probably used to working out consistently already, and like they've been in other workout programs before your program. And I imagine in the horse world you run into people who, I wouldn't say they're like unhealthy out of shape, they're not necessarily doing the like couch to 5K program, but they haven't been in anything regimented like you'd think of with most professional athletes. And if I'm completely wrong in this, let me know, but that's kind of my assumption. So it seems like
Just on
a unique problem for you to have compared to other people that are in your space.
Yeah. Look, so the problem is twofold. So I think, was it James Cook who got suspended last week for the Buffalo Bills for missing a practice meeting?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So Cook got suspended for missing a practice meeting. And that is very much the background that I was used to with other professional sports, is that the athlete has consequence to not
Hmm.
stepping, not fulfilling. Whereas most equestrian sports, the athlete is the coach, the owner, you know, the middle linebacker coach. It's all the same person, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing is to make them responsible for their own consequence. And then the second thing with equestrian sports is my job as your coach is to take all of the obstacles out of the way for you to be maximally able at all times to acquire skill. Because as you rightly put, You might have a 4 foot long femur, you might have a 1 foot long femur, but you've got the talent to do what you need to do. My job is to make sure that your brain, your body, and your knowledge is fixed at all points to make sure that you can just drink skill in like, drinking in a fire hose, because that's ultimately what puts you ahead of the competition, certainly in the development stage. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was a huge problem when I got into equestrian sports. And to be honest, when I first got into them, I handled it badly because I was fresh off of other sports where, okay, I'm the coach. This is what we're going to do. No, I don't want your opinion. Get going.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
um,
rugby and MMA are probably the two most like hardo type sports you could come from,
yeah,
to coming from uh polo or going to polo, which is exceptionally laissez-faire in terms of like, do this, don't do this. We're all here like drinking champagne and having a good time on a Sunday afternoon.
in polo in particular, the senior player on the team tends to run the team. You know,
Yeah.
your
Hmm.
10 goaler doesn't want to turn up to practice. He doesn't. But it's not like you're going to cut him because that's half of your handicap for that team. And you've
Hmm.
paid him dollars to be there.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I think I pushed against it to start with, which all that did was ruin rapport. So pretty quickly on that one, I was like, okay, well, if I'm good enough at my job, I need to be able to show these guys that the stuff we're doing is going to benefit them. So instead of putting my time and energy into trying to create some, I guess you could call it, I don't like this word, but I can't think of a better one, almost a disciplinary structure. Instead of
Hmm.
creating that structure, let consequence be its own disciplinary agent. You know, if you don't turn up and if you don't do your mobility and if you know, have a couple of beers the night before a big final and you play like crap, I could have told you that was going to happen a couple of weeks ago, but all that's going to do is reinforce the fact that the practices you have been keeping up until then had made you feel better. So one of the things I say quite a bit is I like my equestrian athletes to feel awful. I like them to fall off the wagon because sometimes
Hmm.
it takes people falling off the wagon to realize that they were on the wagon and the wagon was a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not everybody, but there's a lot of horse trainers that fall off the wagon more than anyone else I know. Like, horse people know how to fall off the wagon.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of also, without trying to, I've probably sounded quite negative on that. That's also the saving grace of a lot of these sports. I know plenty of professional skiers that hate skiing. I know
Mm.
plenty of professional rugby players that hate rugby. And I'm sure you could apply that to any professional sport where, particularly if you're a good youth athlete, by the time you're in the major leagues, you are saturated, man. And all you've known is pressure and work. You've taken the fun out of it.
Hmm.
And actually, I think that's where the equestrian sports have a pretty good balance because they are professional and there are plenty of amazing athletes doing amazing things and are very focused on what they're doing. But, when it's all said and done, there's more of a sense of community. There's more of a sense of fun to some of these sports than there are in your more mainstream professional sports. And I think that would be a very sad thing to lose if the industry became too professional in that sense.
Sure. Sure. I I 100% understand where you're coming from on that. And so here's where I think some of that is, I think we're not necessarily in danger of ever completely losing that. We're a sport in general, most equine sports, and I'll use Western performance horses as an example. Uh, Reining is one everyone knows. So if I'm like the reining trainer, it's totally within the wheelhouse of, okay, we go to this big reining event. Joe's the trainer. He's going to show the level 4 open horse and do all the stuff and all the pictures, and the live stream's going to happen. And it's like, wow, that's like the professional athlete part of this. But at the same time, I'm going to bring people and other horses, and I might have a family that has been great customers for me, and we're going to put we're gonna put mom and dad in the prime time, the 55 and older division, and they're gonna show there, and then the kids are gonna show in the youth, except for the oldest brother. He wants to go and move up to the amateur and do this, and so it's not like, to continue our NFL example, it's not like there's a bunch of other people on Sunday also playing football. And, like they're there in a fan perspective, but it's the top people that are involved in that event. Where you go to a horse show, you have the top people. And then right next to that is all the people that are doing this for fun as their hobby, right? Their like weekend or week long vacation or whatever it is. And I think that's a really good thing, and I tell people all the time, I think that's a selling point for the horse industry because it's like, here's a sport where you can take the whole family to the sporting event and they can all participate, you know, and you can make it as serious or as not serious as you want to make it. Now, at the top level where there's prize money and all this other stuff and you're being paid, it's serious. But as an amateur, you can make it as serious or not serious as you'd like to make it.
Yeah. I even think that from an owner perspective, people ask me, certainly from other professional sports, they're like, right, talk to me about polo. Polo is probably the best example. Polo or show jumping, right?
Hmm.
So you're spending for the English season, which is May, June, July, maybe the very early start of August. So say 3 months, you're spending probably 3-4 million pounds for the season, which is a
Hmm.
stupendous amount of money. And you'll have coaches from other sports like, why are they doing that? That's a fair question. And I think a big part of it is it gives people who've been successful in other aspects of their life and then maybe retired or stepped back a little bit and kind of lost that sense of identity. It gives them an identity because if you're a patron of the polo team, you're on the field with three of the best players in the world doing your thing, and you get to be involved in a team, you get to be involved in the community. Owners in the cow horse, owners in the show jumping. It's not like being the
Hmm.
owner of, I don't know, no idea what it's like to be the owner of an NFL team, but you don't get to go kind of hang out in the stables and, chat to the trainers and maybe have a ride in the warm up arena on your horse before he goes out and shows. You don't have that level of involvement and interaction that you
Hmm.
often get in the equine industry for these people who've invested heavily in it. And I think that's such a good thing in terms of moving forward, as it is that inclusive mindset that I'm not sure you maintain if you take the industry to the level of professionalism that's now, seen in mainstream sports. I wonder if you lose that somewhere along the way if you made it ultra professional.
Right. Right. And but see, that's kind of what I'm saying is I don't know that you'll ever get to that point because the people we just talked about, the owners and the amateurs, at, right now at least, they're still the ones funding this,
Yeah.
right? And um, I don't know everything that happened because it happened before my time, but the cow horse has had a resurgence since it moved its futurity from Nevada to Texas and kind of became a now it's kind of a whole country thing instead of a West Coast discipline here in the United States. But I've heard guys talk about back in the day, I want to say maybe it was the 70s or something, like cow horse was growing and it was doing good. And then the organization made everything too trainer focused. And they weren't, as an organization, doing enough to take care of their amateurs. And again, this is not me saying this is what happened. I've just heard guys that were around then saying that.
Hmm.
They didn't take care of their amateurs and the non-pros and the owners and things like that. And then the discipline dwindled for a while before it came back, and they got behind the cutting and the reining, just from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
So I think to me, that's like a big lesson that you can take away is it's still the people, on some level, it's still like the people who love the horses in their backyard that drive this whole deal. Um, so yeah, we'll see. But that I think that's a really good observation for you to make, though, because it is um, it is what makes the horse world in general so appealing to non-horse people that want to get involved.
Yeah, the culture.
Yeah.
And, kind of something I wrestle with a little bit. And don't worry, I'm not in any danger of having this amount of influence. So I don't need to worry about it too much. But, you know, I do want professional horsemen and women to see themselves as athletes. I do want them to treat themselves that way because I want to see career longevity for some of these incredibly talented people. And frankly, just good dudes that I've met in
Hmm.
the industry. I'm like, man, I want you to be, Dougie Williamson, like going down the fence in your 70s and not having an ounce of pain in your body. I want that for you because you're just a good person,
Hmm.
completely aside everything else.
Yeah. So let me lead us to what is now what I would consider the self-serving part of this podcast.
Right.
Okay. So just to get an idea of your program, I want to go through an exercise if you're okay with it. Let's say, I come to you. I am a horse trainer, but I come to you as a trainer who feels like this is something I need now in my program. Is this outside influence to help me with the longevity side? So I'm like, "Hey, Gus, my name is Joe. I'm here. I train horses. This is what I do. How can you help me?" Like, what does that look like? Do you just start with an evaluation, or how do you kind of onboard people? And then what does it look like being your client?
So let's let's say you're coming on as one of my personal clients that I'm going to be working with directly.
Hmm.
The biggest thing for me is creating buy-in early. I know my stuff works, but the most important thing to me in terms of having a, a good working relationship together is that my stuff works. So yes, you're right. It starts with an evaluation, and I'll get you doing it in front of a mirror or in a way that you can feel what I'm seeing. So I'm going to say, Joe, when you walk there, you see your right toe turns out a little bit. That tells me that that femur on that side is externally rotated. What that means is you're going to lift the hip on that side and drop the shoulder on that side and slightly rotate your torso the other way. So your torso is now left rotated. Your right leg is, or your right seat bone is up, and your left seat bone is on. And I often do this with horses tacked up so that you can jump on and feel what I'm talking about. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, let's stick with pick a discipline. Let's say cow horse, right? Now, when you go to, when you're in the herd work, this means that your horse is going to preferentially want to go right on a turn and it's going to be late on your left turn. And the way that tends to manifest is you're going to make the first turn left because you can pre-position yourself. You're going to make the right turn because that's the one your horse prefers given your biomechanics and the influence you're getting from your pelvis. But I bet you on your third turn, you're going to be late. And you're going to have to shift your body over all this real estate of the horse's back because you've put yourself in a bad position that's going to slow the horse down. And often what we'll do is I'll put a marker down your spine and across your shoulders, and I'll video this in slow-mo so that you can see it and you can feel it. And then I'll get you off the horse and I'll say, okay, we're going to adjust this, this, and this. And this is going to give you a 20-minute, half-hour window of your future. And then I get you back on the horse and we video it again and you get to feel it. And hopefully, if I've done my job right, you jump off, wow, that felt way easier. And yeah, you're right. That left turn came just lickety split, no dramas. I'm like, cool. Now you're bought in. Now the work starts. Okay. That's the easy bit. At
Yeah.
which point we would go through, what facilities do you have to train in? So I end up using the TRX a lot with a lot of my cowboys just because of, you're pretty remote, you're pretty busy. If you're riding 20 horses a day, you're not necessarily going to be able to take 2 hours off to get into town and get to the gym. Right. Well, we're going to use a TRX for your program. And I send it to you in a form with, videos and explanations, and you get access to me to kind of go through it with you. And once the training piece is in place and you've got some level of continuity there, then we start talking nutrition. And again, I keep it super simple. I love using something called a continuous glucose monitor, which tells you what your blood sugar levels are doing 24 hours a day. And I'm like, okay, Joe, here's what I want you to do. I want you to eat 2 grams per kilo of protein And anything that spikes your blood glucose above 100, you need to flag, and we need to think of a better option for you there. Because anytime your blood
Hmm.
glucose is 100, one, that's going to mess with your mental acuity and a reaction time. And two, that's going to mean you're putting on body fat. And three, that long term, if you extrapolate that, that's a bad deal for health. So let's avoid that, and let's build a strategy together that is blueprinted off your blood results. So it's not some cookie cutter deal that may or may not work for you based on your inter-individual variance. It's something that we know is blueprinted to how your body deals with a given fuel in real time. And once that's in place, then we get to the cool stuff. I'm going to say, Joe, next time you're about to go and do a run or a competition, or half an hour before you ride into the arena, I want you to take 400 to 600 milligrams of something called alpha GPC, which will help with your reaction time, help with your nerves, and help with your mental capacity during that time. It'll sharpen you right up. And we can go, as deep as you want to on that well in terms of making you a high performance athlete ready to do what you want to do on that day.
Hmm. Interesting. So it's kind of a threefold deal. Like first you implement the workout regime, and then you have the nutrition, and then lastly is kind of the day of performance.
Yeah. So, you know, is it the Marines who have this? You may well know this better than me, but you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your preparation.
Yeah, that's the Marines.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. You
Hmm.
know,
Me too.
I want your level of preparation to be so high that, at least from a physical and mental perspective on the day, things can go wrong. You can lose a cow, your horse can freaking trip in the rundown, whatever. But you need to walk into that arena with a clear head going, I am ready for this. And now the cards can fall where they may, but I've done everything I can. I do a small amount of sports psychology, and I think people talk a lot about, drills for confidence or drills for nerves or drills for performance. And to a certain extent, a lot of those drills are BS, because
Hmm.
your subconscious is about as honest a feedback as you're ever going to get. You know, if you've not studied for the test, no amount of positive affirmations or playing positive scenarios in your head or preparation is going to change the fact that you're going to feel compromised on the day of the test.
Hmm.
And the way I see it as a coach is, let's give you as many tools as we can possibly give you in your toolbox, so that when the day of the test comes, you know you're prepared, and then it's easier to be confident. It's easier to deal with your nerves, and it's easier to perform.
Yeah. Yeah. The I don't know where I stand on that subject. So I agree with you that preparation's the number one thing. Okay. Um, like when I go show, or historically when I was in school, I was a good student. I could take tests and do well and things like that. Um, I later learned that has no bearing on how successful you are in real life, but I was good at that game, right? Um, so I totally agree that like preparation is is key. And like I like the expression, whatever you have at home when you're practicing on your horse, you're going to get about 70% of that in the show ring. Like you
Yeah,
can count on about 70% of that. And then that other 30% is like the horse being good, you schooling on it for half an hour in the arena it knows, and like it being in its routine. But you can count on about 70% of that horse, generally speaking, to be there. And obviously, there's exceptions. There's some horses that love to go to town and show, and there's some horses that you couldn't make them be show horses um, for all for a ton of gold or anything. But uh, on the other hand, have you ever read a book called Psycho Cybernetics?
yes,
Yeah. So then you get where I'm going with this. There is some level of aspect of your thinking, like thinking about something and then kind of letting your brain go on autopilot. like your raining pattern, for example. Like, okay, I'm just going to think about my raining pattern, think about my raining pattern, think about my raining pattern, and now I'm gonna like go to sleep, and then in the morning, my brain has thought about my raining pattern while I'm at least the front of my brain is turned off, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I do think there is a level of you have to do those mental things. And then I guess the counter argument, maybe I'm talking myself in a circle here, but maybe the counter argument that you'd offer is that's part of the preparation you're talking about. So
Yeah.
that, but you see what I'm saying? How it's like, I agree with you. And I totally subscribe to you. You follow the level of your preparation, or I've also heard the express, you follow the level of your systems, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the same deal. Um, but there is something to be said for you have to mentally get yourself in the right place to go execute whatever it is. Um, and there are things you can do mentally to prepare for that, I think.
Yeah. Look, sorry, just to clarify, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is if you have prepared behind the scenes in whatever sense,
Mhm.
physically with your horse, you've schooled enough, you've worked on the weak points enough in any aspect. That second mental piece, in terms of getting in the right headspace mentally, is very powerful. Whereas
Mhm.
if you haven't prepared, that second piece is not powerful enough.
I would agree with that. Yeah. See, now, and that's why we have long form podcasts so we can have discussions like that. Um, so with all that preparation, like that onboarding process, how long does that usually take? Do you kind of implement that over like 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks?
Depends on
Where are
the
you at
individual.
with that?
Depends on the individual, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying. You know, with the approach of working with equestrian athletes versus working with pro sports teams where they have that level of, I can't think of a better word, so help me out, Joe, if you can, but that level of discipline or expectation. You know,
Hmm.
with a pro sports team, it's like, this is your new plan. You start it today, by and large.
Yeah.
Whereas with equestrian athletes, you know, I want to be, I want to be supportive in every way that I can. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to take too much in the way of BS. And I think the longer you coach people, and I'm sure you have the same thing, you deal with, you know, clients or customers, the longer you're in a game, the better you get at spotting people who are BSing early on.
Hmm. Totally.
Better you address that. So yeah, it's a fine line between going like, I want to work with this person and I appreciate that this is potentially a very divergent thing from what they've been doing in their day to day, and it's going to take some time to implement. And maybe your expectations are 10 out of 10 and they can regularly hit a 7 out of 10. Awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. Then again, you also have people who, your expectations are 10 out of 10 and they're regularly hitting a 3 out of 10 and telling you that a five's too hard. Those are
Yeah.
the more difficult people to kind of deal with.
Right.
So, in terms of how long it takes, if the person is kind of, and this is the great thing, it's interesting to me that the people that are more successful are also the people that are easier to deal with across the board.
Hmm. I can see that.
You know, so people that are doing well and more successful and have that growth mindset are almost hurrying you up with the onboarding process. Like, okay, I've got that nutrition, I've got that glucose monitor, we're good to go. What's the next thing?
Hmm.
Whereas people who are potentially less successful are the ones you tend to have to sheepdog up a little bit and say, hey, we spoke about the glucose monitor 2 weeks ago, and I know you get Amazon where you are. Like, what's happening with that? And if there's a problem, or if you potentially don't want it for whatever reason, or it's going to be a hard thing to implement, that's fine too. But you need to talk to me. You can't just go radio silent. So it varies. But yeah, I like to have everything up and running within 3 weeks. So a week per new part of the puzzle.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. I'm going to use that sheepdog up. I like that expression quite a bit. Cool. Um, w- well, let me ask you this. Obviously, you're not going to get into specifics, but what when you start evaluating someone physically,
Mhm.
is there kind of things you expect to see with people who are career horseback riders? Like
Oh, yeah.
like the imbalances you expect to see? Can you talk about those some?
Yeah, and I have no problem getting into specifics in terms of this because
Yeah.
I would.
Well, I meant you don't have to include client names in
Oh,
terms of
okay, yeah.
specifics. Yeah.
No.
But yeah, no, I want to get so let me start off. I don't have the education on this subject that you do, but it is something that interests me, and a lot of my uh, journey with trying to stay healthy and fit while riding horses for a living has just
Mhm.
been anecdotal. Um, but one thing I have found for me and everyone I've ever dealt with that I also know, like not dealt with as in I'm consulting for them, but just people I talk to, and I'm like, well, maybe you should try doing this because I started doing this and now I hurt less. Uh, most people who ride for a living have really weak internal hip rotation.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, I realize I'm like the caveman talking to the
Oh,
PhD right
that
here.
is that way more of a the reason I'm smiling is that is way more of an astute observation than I would have expected. So you go ahead, buddy. You're on it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, so I mean, to me, like if someone like I'm sitting in a chair right now,
Mhm.
it's like we constantly have I don't know all the muscles, but like the outside of our legs firing all the time, and we're sitting on a horse. You know, I sit with my legs wrapped around my horse. Um, and then all of all of these movements where my ball and socket joint of my hip, where I have to rotate my femur inward,
Mhm.
I'm I'm proportionally very weak at those compared to externally rotating.
Yeah.
And like one part of the journey that I've been on and I've noticed, like in fixing that, now when I walk, my feet are straight. I'm not out to the side. Like you can walk around, and a lot of horse trainers, especially older horse trainers, in the Western world, we'd call them cowhocked, where
Yeah.
their feet are their toes are pointing away from the center line of their body, as opposed to their feet kind of being parallel to one another. And I'm sure it's like horses, like there's some level of like that's just how God made you type
Yeah.
deal. But to have everyone look like that, where it's like if you look down at your feet, sometimes they almost make a 90-degree angle for some people.
Yeah.
Um, like that to me, I've noticed that and I'm like, oh, I bet that person is not very strong in their internal hip rotation because that's how I was before I worked on that.
You're spot on. So I actually do that as a joke when I'm giving clinics. I'm like, how do you spot a cowboy? And I'll turn my toes up, like you just spoken about there, to 90 degrees. And I'll make sure that my stride length is about 3.5 inches max, you know,
Yeah.
because of that. So, I mean, there's a huge amount we could dive into there. And yeah, you've made a very astute observation. But the reason that those people are cowhopped is because their external rotators are so tight.
Hmm.
Okay. And what people don't realize about that is if your external rotators are tight, it tips your pelvis forward. So if you're sitting, think about sitting in your seat at the moment. If you think arch your lower back and rock forward onto the front of your seat bones, that's the position it puts you in. When that happens, is your sacrum moves and kind of pushes everything forward. Because in a gait pattern, when you're walking, you are not particularly well suited to absorbing gravity. So it pushes your center of balance forward and generally onto your toe. And if you're externally rotated through your feet like that, your lower back is in a huge amount of flexion and your pelvis is tipped all the way forwards. Now, from a immediate performance thing, your rotative capability in that position is pretty minimal because you're already at end range. From a career longevity deal, your glutes are the biggest muscles on your body because they're designed to take the most force. If you switch those off and taken them to a shortened range, what do you think is above that in the chain that is going to take all of that impact and take all of that torque? when you're riding?
Mhm.
Well, your lower back, right? And so how many of my, say, of my cross section of riders across the sports, what do you reckon the most common complaint in terms of pain is?
Lower back pain.
Yeah, all the time, because of
Mhm.
exactly what you've just spoken about. And then you can get into the nitty gritty. Western saddles will put you in that position a little bit more because they're just a bit
Mhm.
wider.
Mhm.
So if you're in Western disciplines, you're kind of more susceptible to that. And yeah, I mean, weak internal rotators, weak hip flexors, tight adductors, lumbar spine that is in hyperextension, a thoracic spine that's in flexion. It is amazing that, some people, and even people at the highest level, get done what they do given the position they're in. But my kind of point with that is these people are doing an amazing thing in a bad position. Imagine what they could do if they're in a good position.
Yeah. Yeah, when all of a sudden they're not overcoming their own mechanics.
Yeah. So just kind of going back to the question, you've hit on the main one already. So that weak internal rotator, or that lack of internal rotator capacity, is a huge one. What people don't realize is that that has huge effects up the chain in terms of what's going to happen with your rib cage and your spine. So often you'll have a flared rib cage and a forward shoulder. And from a straight performance perspective, the plane of motion that we tend to get robbed of soonest is rotation,
Mhm.
which is huge in the Western disciplines, more so than a lot of other sports. If you look at dressage and the like, certainly at the lower levels, before you're doing the canter pirouettes or something like that, it's
Mhm.
pretty forward and backy. Whereas if you look at the Western disciplines, it's all rotation, man. Reining, you're going to do a spin. Cutting, you're constantly rotating backwards and forwards. That's the whole deal. You know,
Mhm.
the cow horse, your fence turn is about as traumatic a rotative event as your spine is ever gonna ever gonna experience. So you better have prepped it for that. And it's not surprising when you speak to people who've been in the game a while. You're like, man, I just don't go down the fence anymore. I can't take it, because they don't have that rotative and compressive capability through their spine because of all these inferences that have happened from a poor hip position. And then the biggest thing for me that influences equine sports and separates them from every other sport, and this is super important when you're training equestrian athletes, is our body is designed around reactions to ground reaction force, right? That's
Mhm.
what switches all of our joints on, switches all of our muscles on, and gets us firing. Now, depending on your sport, you're going to have varying degrees of that transferred to you through the horse, through the saddle, and through the stirrup. But that main driving force of what switches muscles on and off is watered down. So you kind of
Mhm.
get this cyclic effect of you're doing stuff without that's putting you in a suboptimal position anyway, which riding is.
Mhm.
Add to that the fact that you're not experiencing much in the way of ground reaction force, unless you get turned into a lawn dart and then you get reminded of what ground reaction force is really quick, but that's an aside. Okay. You're not experiencing much in the way of ground reaction force, so your muscles and joints are being switched off by your sport, which makes you worse when you get off the horse at just being a human, walking
Mhm.
around, driving, sitting, picking up a bag of feed, whatever that might be, which then leads to compensation patterns that make you worse when you get back on the horse.
Mm.
But yeah, what we'll see with the majority of riders is they'll have both toes or a toe that turns out more than the other. They'll
Mhm.
have no hip extension capability. And 9 times out of 10, because it links to what happens to your
What do you
spine when,
mean by hip extension? Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like, exactly
yeah,
what that means?
yeah. So the easiest way of kind of visualizing that is if you were to do a reverse lunge,
Okay.
step backwards, that back leg where the femur is behind the line of your body's upright and the femur's back here, is
Mhm.
in hip extension.
Okay.
Okay. And that has a lot to do with being able to stay with the horse. So your torso being suspended with the movement of the horse is because that hip is extending, allowing your torso to go back and then pulling you back
Mhm.
forward. You don't have that capability. You start to see that kind of hunched riding style that a lot of people adapt.
Mhm.
And the worst thing you're forced into adapting that style because you don't have that capability through your hips, and that style is going to increase the likelihood of your low back blowing up, which is going to increase the likelihood of you needing to further adopt that style.
Yeah,
So you end up
I see.
on a hunched over posture.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you have one or both feet that are turned out in external rotation, which tends to, if say your right leg's turned out, 9 times out of 10, that means your left leg is turned in. So you have an
Hmm.
externally rotated left leg. Lack of hip extension, so you can't move your hips forward through space with your leg fixed, which is then going to lock up the thoracic spine, and you see a lean. That's the one that really tends to mess with horse performance, is you're shorter on one side and longer on the other, which is something that horse people understand well. Depends what verbiage you want to use for this, but certainly in the English world, they talk about a horse that's short on one side and long on the other. So you must have had this with colts or even horses that you've made, that they're pretty good laterally flexing to one side,
Mm-hmm.
but they're terrible through the other side. And if you ask for too much lateral flexion, they start to fall out of the shoulder or something like that. We're no
Mm-hmm.
different. So yeah, the issue with riders being tipped one way is, one, it'll make your horse one-sided. So you'll find it easier to pick up a certain lead, a certain lateral, a certain turn. And two, that changes the pressure through the pelvis, which in turn, so say my right seat bone weighs more than my left because I'm tilted. Okay. So if I'm tilted left, that right seat bone is going to weigh more than my left. That means that the opposite forelimb of the horse is going to have to bear more load, and the same side hind limb is going to have to bear more load. So if you
Mm-hmm.
think of like a sliding stop, and you see this replicated in practice, if you're loading your left seat bone more and you go to slide into a stop, well, that horse is going to be loading way more through that left hind hock than there are the right hind hock. Guess which hock's going to need to be injected more? Guess which hock's going to get blown up from overwork? So we have inferences on the horse in terms of its longevity of its career as well, which is something I'm also very passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. See, that stuff is just fascinating to me. And I think one of the reasons I find it so interesting, it's I wouldn't say it's easy to fix. And I don't even know if fix is the right word. But there are ways you can address that stuff relatively easy compared to like other problems in your life you might have, right?
Yeah.
Um Now, it takes a lot of discipline too. I'm sure you have this, what we talked about a little bit already, falling off the wagon, and I do it too. It's like I've got some protocols and things I do to like stay healthy and feel good at like in my job. Um and then all of a sudden I haven't done them for 5 days and like all the pain starts coming back or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
because I'm still putting all that pressure on my body, but I'm not doing anything once I get off the horse to uh, basically reset my body into how it's supposed to operate.
Yeah. I mean,
It, kind of going off of your description, it sounds like that's it's like we get on the horse and it throws our body out of whack, and then we
yeah.
come off. And if we don't fix that, then because our body's already out of whack, we're going to move and make it more out of whack in another way because we're compensating in our locomotion on the ground. And then we get back on the horse and it just like you get on and off and on and off and it just compounds until, like you said, you're riding like this.
Yeah. And I think, like, this, the important thing to realize about riding, and this is, I ride, it's my favorite thing to do. Like, I'm not hating on it, but
Mm-hmm.
it is unique among sports in terms of detraining your body. You
Mm-hmm.
can be a gymnast, and that's going to positively influence how you move and perform 9 times out of 10, unless you have some freak injury. There is no rider on the planet that is positively influencing their biomechanics through riding. That's just not a fact. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we need to do some, I call it hygiene. When I talk to people, it's no different from brushing your teeth. I don't know about you. I don't particularly enjoy brushing my teeth. It's not like something like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, I've got to brush my teeth. Like, don't get me wrong, I do it. I'm religious with it. but it's not something I enjoy. I just know it has to be done or decay occurs. Riding
Mhm.
is no different. I love riding, but I also know that unless I keep up with the stuff off the horse, decay is going to occur. And that's actually probably something worth touching on as well, Joe, is so often with coaches who I increasingly work with now, the old mindset with riding is trying to fix a riding problem on the horse, right? Get your heels down, get your shoulders back, turn that shoulder this way, pull this shoulder this way.
Mm, mhm.
In my mind, that's no different than a Formula One mechanic trying to fix a problem on the body of the car while it's going around a racetrack. You know, that doesn't work. Bring it back into the garage, fix that problem, send it back out on the racetrack, and you don't have to have any of that input in terms of trying to fix position on the horse, because your position on the horse isn't the problem. Your lack of strength off the horse or your lack of balance and symmetry off the horse is the problem. So you can almost run the risk of creating more issues through compensation by trying to fix issues on the horse than you can trying to fix issues on the ground.
Oh, 100%, man. I It was almost like me growing up. I grew up in the hunter show world and like doing hunters and eventing. And I know you don't have hunters in the UK, um, but they like in the equitation stuff. It was like looking back, almost barbaric what they would do to people to try to fix their position on the horse. I particularly remember I had my stirrups because I'm a taller guy. I'm 6'3". I don't know how tall I was at the time, but taller than average. Um, so I had this my stirrups, the inside of my stirrups, tied to the girth with baling twine to in an effort to help my like feet be closer to the horse's barrel and keep my feet from going like this when I rode.
I'm laughing because I
Um,
saw that last week somewhere, but continue.
yeah. You know what that does? That really jacks your knees up.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
trying to ride in that contorted
Yeah.
position, but
And going
um,
back to what you were saying about external rotation, if your hips, if your femurs are out here and
yeah,
you pull your toe in there, the
yep,
only thing that will take that rotation is your knee.
100%. No, it was barbaric, and I after a week or two, I vetoed that, and I was like, I'll just lose. Thanks, though. Like I'm not.
Losing's less
uh,
painful.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, so it it's really interesting when you were saying all that. My mother's passed away now, but I remember thinking this was something she always said when I was a kid. Um, she said, riding is something that you will be better at if you are in shape, but you don't get in shape by riding.
Yeah. Your
Yeah.
mother,
And
hold on.
and again, she was saying this like late 90s, early 2000s. So that was kind of like at least in the world she was in, that was kind of a hot take at the time. And now you say it and people are like, "Oh no, that kind of makes sense." Um but yeah, I remember her expressly saying that to me and the people she taught. Um the problem you run into, and you're probably not running into this when you deal with professionals, but I I have some people that are like, "Okay, well, I have a real life and I'm doing this and I get to ride like twice a week. What else can I do to get better at riding?" And I try to as gently and kindly as possible say, I was like, well, you could do this stuff and like work on your balance. And, I don't straight up tell people if you lost some weight, it would help. But a lot of times that's an honest answer. Um, People a lot of times do not respond well to that, at least in the ways I've been able to present it. Because there's a lot of people, I don't know, it's almost like hard for them to hear when you tell them that riding is an athletic endeavor.
Yeah.
And
I think,
so
look,
if you are more athletic, you will be better at it.
Yes, absolutely. And not just that, but the people who tend to be good athletes at other sports also tend to be pretty good at riding, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
But just going, made me chuckle, just going back to the back thing, at what you said about carrying body weight. So this is something that I don't know what the word is. I'm kind of like pretty binary about this. You know, today
Yeah.
it's rare. The sky is blue in England. I am
Yeah.
not going to tell you the sky is gray because that's an easier answer for you to bear. The sky is blue.
Hmm.
It's not a
Hmm.
personal attack on you. It's just a fact. And I think one of the things that really frustrates me, and particularly in the aged events where you're on horses that are pretty weak anyway, just by virtue of the fact that they're a 3-year-old,
Hmm.
I don't think people realize the deleterious effect on performance that carrying what I term non functional mass has on the horse.
Hmm.
So, my way of getting around this, Joe, when I was doing clinics, and I've stopped doing this, maybe I should bring it back, was to put 5 kilos of like a half full water bladder in a backpack
Yep.
and get run up and down the arena with that. And then I put 5 kilos like a really tightly packed sandbag in a backpack and get them to run up and down the arena with that. And it's not so much the weight, it is for sure, that is a factor, but it's also, can you control that weight
Mm-hmm.
from a strength perspective, from an athletic perspective? And you get people running up and down the arena with that half full water bladder, jostling them all over the place. I'm like, cool. You tell me which of those was harder work.
Yeah.
And tell me that when you get on your 3-year-old, that's not having an effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I
Well,
think
and go
we
ahead.
as we have no, I just think we have a responsibility of as riders. And look, I'm aware of this myself, not necessarily because I'm fat. Sometimes I am, particularly when I come back from the States, but I try and stay as functionally light as I can do because I ride. This doesn't mean you need to be on some crazy jockey diet where you're eating a lettuce leaf a day, but also if you're 20, 30 kilos overweight and you're looking to do the right thing by yourself and your horse, it's worth having a conversation, man, because that is one of the most impactful things you could do for not just your horse's performance and longevity, but yourself and your own health.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, here's another anecdote I'll use. Uh, one summer, I worked on a dude ranch in Montana. We were like guiding rides and stuff like that. And that's something where, because you have a lot of people who are very green riders, you have to be very aware of your horse care and what goes into maintaining those horses. And again, I'm uh I'm a bigger guy. I'm 6'3", and my weight generally fluctuates anywhere between 220 and 205 in pounds. So whatever, I'm sure you know what that is in kilograms, but um that's a larger than average human.
You're a big dude.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, but what I saw was I I could ride horses and not necessarily, at least doing that, like I wouldn't like sore them up after a whole summer. And
Okay.
then people who did not have the balance and the control and just the experience, that were smaller than me, they would put a pounding on those horses, and you could like see it physically on their backs and their top lines and things like that over
Yeah.
time, because the horse was just not, they, like you said, the people weren't with them from a
Yeah.
balance standpoint. And so, a- and that's not like, I right now we're this week is Thanksgiving in the States, and so we've already been celebrating. So I'm at the upper end of my weight range that I just mentioned right now. So I'm not making excuses like, well, it's okay for me to be big. Um, but I have noticed that anecdotally is, if you put larger people on horses, but the I like what you termed the functional mass. It's more functional mass,
Hmm.
and they know how to balance and stuff. It does not wear on those horses the same way. Maybe you
No.
take a 175-pound person who should be a 130-pound person and also doesn't know how to ride.
Yeah. 100%. And, there's kind of a sport specific or lifestyle specific drop off of that. So I do something called my functional cowboy program, which I run a lot of my Western pros on. And, the idea of that program is, yes, to make you really, really good on the horse and good in the saddle, but also to make sure that you can, carry a bale of hay in each hand or freaking change a tire on a pickup or something like that. And
Mhm.
if you're at the lightest weight you could possibly be, one, that's pretty miserable and unsustainable. And two, it's all very well that that might be a good spot for you to be on the horse, but you're going to drop off strength, which means you may not be in the right spot for the horse. But also, are you going to be good at life outside of that? So there's
Right.
kind of a sweet spot there. But I don't know if any of your listeners are into this, but there's a study done on this, a very good study done on this. And interestingly, it was by a lady called Dr. Hillary Clayton. And I think she lost her license for this because it was considered unethical. Don't quote me on that, but I'm relatively certain. So she did exactly that. She did a 20-point pain score or discomfort score on horses ridden, and it's a well designed scientific study ridden by riders of different weights. And the top weight level for that rider, you can see the video online. Like, this lady is distinctly overweight, and
Mhm.
of the 20 uh 20 points of analysis that they were looking at, that horse failed on 20 out of 20. And not just that horse, so did the rest of them, just
Mhm.
because of what that did to the horse's way of going and its gait, having to carry that level of you know uncontrolled mass.
Yeah.
And again, just to reiterate, I sound like I'm hating on people. I'm not. I don't care. Do you? As long as you're happy, that's the main thing. But then there comes a point where you do also need to be honest and say, hey, yes, this is affecting your horse's capability.
Mhm.
Yes, affecting your health. And if you have a performance goal, yes, that is being affected. And part of being a good coach is kind of willing to tell people what they don't want to hear sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, like you said, you can like, you're not hating. Like, you can give people grace without avoiding reality. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that's so key. All this stuff really interests me, and I I'm like anyone. I kind of go through waves of how well I stick to it, and I find my pattern uh to continue with our NFL analogy. I feel like my busy season's like April 1st through November 1st.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just like when the time changes and we're going to horse shows and doing stuff. And basically, like, however fit I am April 1st, at least it's been this case for the last 2 years, that's about as fit as I'm going to be like the whole year. And then it will sadly, like, my nutrition might not drop too bad, but like in terms of my exercise and stuff, it'll probably drop through the fall. And then now I'm kind of in the phase of like I am exercising regularly again and kind of build it. I'm sure that's not the best approach to that, but I'm finding that that's kind of the cycle I've been in like the last 2 years anyway.
I don't think that's a bad approach. I mean, it was eye opening for me, right? As I said, I got to spend some time with some of my Western professionals. I got to spend some time on the Dow's Ranch with Nick
Hmm.
and Casey Buros, who I think you've also had on the podcast.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it was good
Big
for me
fan
to
of
spend
Casey.
time with those guys because, yeah, they're not making excuses. They are legitimately busy in that time. And now, over the winter, this is the quiet time when they can build a base.
Hmm.
And they are doing so. From that perspective, though, it's so much easier to use this time to build a decent base. And then, say, during the show season or spring branding, whatever you're doing, you know, during that time, you don't have to do too much to maintain that.
Yeah.
Where if you're approaching it from a maintenance perspective to start with, well, what are you maintaining? Like, yes, you can make, you know, any person listening to this can go right now, and I'm not a huge fan of this exercise for various reasons that I'm happy to get into, but go do a couch stretch. YouTube a couch stretch, hold a couch stretch on each leg for 2 minutes, go ride. I bet you any money you feel better riding. So that's a change you've made from 4 minutes of resting your leg up behind you on the sofa, right?
Hmm.
that is so much easier to maintain and exceed if you have a base. Whereas if your base is doing a couch stretch, and again, I'm not throwing shade, that's an awesome thing to do. And if you're doing nothing else, you should definitely be doing that. But the level of what you're capable of is not even being scratched in that sense, you know?
Mhm. So, what do you not like about the couch stretch?
I'll be honest, that was kind of a leading statement. So people
So,
have
can
a
I tell you my guess? Because
go
this
on.
will just be a fun exercise for
Mate,
me.
you've been
So, I
spot on so
used
far.
to. What'd you say?
I said you've been spot on so far, so go for it.
Okay, so I used to do that a lot. So I kind of like hit the double whammy of stuff that was bad for you. Because my main sport all through high school was pole vaulting, and then
What?
I went into riding. Um, so like if you want to hit, I don't know what else I could have done. I guess I could have become a farrier after and hit like the trifecta of things that are bad for your lower back. Um, but you want to talk about something that'll put some unilateral torque on your back. Pole vaulting puts some unilateral torque on your back because you're jumping
Oh yeah.
off the same leg every time. You're taking off in a non-symmetrical position. Um, and unfortunately, I was not educated at the time enough to like basically go do that and then put my body back together. So I had to deal with a lot of my early 20s being pretty uncomfortable in my
Mhm.
hips and my back from pole vaulting so much. Um, but one of the things I worked on through the various programs I've tried was the couch stretch, and it does like it helps, right? Um, but I again have no backing for this except for just what's worked for me. So um, that's kind of my disclaimer. I've found that if you just stretch and do that, and you don't do anything to strengthen the muscles that are you're stretching, like it doesn't do anything for you long term. Like you can just stretch and then 30 minutes later you just won't feel good again
Right. So
because
you're knocking it out of the
everything
park.
just comes back together.
Yeah, you're knocking it out of the park with this. The whole thing that I base, the whole shtick that I base my program on is I tried to explain this to people, and the best analogy I've come up with this is this. Stretching gives you rental capacity of your body. Load gives you ownership capacity. So using the couch stretch as an example, why your hip flexors tight? Well, your hip flexors are tight because your pelvis is rotated forward because you are
Hmm.
not able to absorb gravity effectively. Okay. So you can stretch those muscles further without changing any of the geometry that's made you bad at absorbing gravity. And yes, that will give you some time where you have more hip extension and more ability than you might do until your nervous system, which does not make mistakes, realizes that that's not an optimal position for you to absorb gravity and puts you right back where you were. Or you can train your nervous system to strengthen the muscles that hold you in a more symmetrical position where your pelvis isn't tipped forward. And then your hip flexors just never get tight,
Hmm.
which is much
Yeah.
more the road I follow. And look, just for full disclosure, the first exercise on my base program is a couch stretch because it will give you instantaneous performance or instantaneous relief in a lot of cases. However, you've always got to be moving towards taking ownership of your body and ownership of your capability to manage load, as opposed to just constantly having a nail in your tire and just stopping by the gas station to put air in it every time the pressure comes down.
Right. So in that example, the couch stretch, what would be the exercise you would prescribe to strengthen the muscles that you're gaining rent on by doing the couch stretch?
Depends on the individual, so there will be some variance on this, but I'll give you one that'll work for 75-80% of people. I
Sure.
quite like elevating the front foot on a box, straightening the back leg, so you're in hip extension, and then having a cable, a TRX, or a band that you drive forward in an oblique fashion across your body, where you have to engage the glute on the back side whilst holding yourself in that posteriorly rotated position of the pelvis.
Okay, so like the cable's in your hand?
Yeah, so front foot on a box, standing on the tight leg or the leg that you're trying to get a stretch out of, and engage your glute against some form of resistance like a cable or a band or something like that.
Okay,
It does
and it's
also
just a
work
hold. Is it a static hold?
static hold. To start with,
Interesting.
isometrics are a great place.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, and that so one of the things, and you've probably caught on, like I have some level of interest in all this, and one of the things that I haven't really delved into yet, and it sounds like that touches on it, is training the rotation, like the
Hmm.
spinal rotation. Um, and I guess it's slowly coming more in vogue, it seems. At least that was what my like Instagram feed would off like say. But if you I think if someone just got online and said, I want to be in better shape and got like a basic lifting regimen or fitness regimen,
Yeah.
there's not a ton of rotation training in there,
Yeah.
traditionally speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent and I'll come back to your question.
please do. Please do. Yeah.
The tangent I'm going on is if you look at more equestrian specific, and for those of you that are just listening, I'm doing the old like Austin Powers like blinky finger thing, specific laser beams. For those of you that are looking for equestrian specific training, for someone, and I'm hopefully not coming across as a dick saying this, but for someone who's kind of looking at it from a hopefully pretty well educated background, a lot of specificity equals like equestrian light. So you'll be doing loads of stuff that looks cool on Instagram that isn't really loading you. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not how tissue remodels or adapts. Whereas as a base, I think a lot of riders would be way better just downloading a base strength and conditioning program that may not have a huge degree of rotation in it, but has all of the bases covered foundationally from a strength and conditioning perspective. You know, hip, squat, pull, push, brace. Because you will, because of how spinal and hip mechanics work, you will increase your ability to rotate through being able to flex and extend, which is what a lot of those programs are based on. And even if we were to try and improve your rotation today, we may need to look at what we would term the more sagittal plane, so the more front and back flexion extension stuff, as a first jumping off point anyway.
Ah, I see. Yeah. So like basically what you're saying is you've got to address that kind of the fundamentals that if anyone thinks of a basic workout program is going to address, you need to address that before you get into the rotation.
Yes, I guess I am saying that. I mean, I would then caveat that by saying I would very quickly progress to positions of isometric anti-rotation, which is another
Mm-hmm.
concept that's probably worth talking about. Your core is not designed to, I'm going to be careful how I say this, is not designed to move as much as it's designed to prevent the wrong stuff moving. That's
Yeah,
the
that
role of the
makes
core.
sense.
So going back to your knee analogy, the reason you had knee pain when you stitched your toes together with some baling twine is because your knee is not designed to rotate.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, from a spinal perspective, which, you know, hips and spine are your key rotative areas of your body, which is why they're so impactful to riders, because your hips are what's, you know, unlike other sports, your hips are interacting directly with the horse at most times.
Mm-hmm.
Your hips and spines are the key, and spine is the key rotational segments of your body. But there are segments of your spine, or a segment of your spine, namely your lumbar spine, that is not designed to rotate that much
Hmm.
relative to your thoracic and cervical spine. And what we most often see,
Can you
because,
specify what those are for people listening?
yeah, so cervical spine is your neck, thoracic spine is the bit that attaches to your ribs, Lumbar spine is everything below that, and then you hook into your sacrum and your hips. That bit
Okay.
right above your sacrum, your lumbar spine, which not by accident is the bit that your abs are linked to on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
The reason your abs are designed to brace in terms of anti-rotation, anti-extension, is to protect that and not let it rotate that much. Because if that doesn't move, that acts as a very good, think of it as the drive shaft in your pickup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got your glutes and your hips at the bottom of the engine. You got the drive shaft, which is your lumbar spine, and then the wheels, in this weird analogy that may or may not work, are your thoracic and cervical spine. So the more stability you have through that lumbar region, the better able to rotate you are to your thoracic and hips. But through dysfunction, particularly in ridden sports, what we see happening is people asking their lumbar spine to rotate because their hips and their thoracic spine are so tight that they can't rotate, in the same way that your knee got asked to rotate when you tied your toe in and tied your hip out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we see all these, the aforementioned pro rider medal of honor that is back pain.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
And then you do you take 3 energy drinks and handful of ibuprofen and get
Or
on the
you
next
just
one.
inject it and pretend it never happened and just keep rolling on.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Cool. That's interesting. So I could keep going on all this stuff for a long time. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you have an Instagram video about this,
Okay.
um, footwear. So you talk about you get off the horse, right?
Yeah.
And then you're out of whack because you just rode a horse. It's bad for your body. So you, like you said earlier, if you don't do the hygiene to put your body back in sync, it'll just kind of start this whole spiral. Um, but the other thing is you'll walk around, and 9 times out of 10, you'll walk around in riding boots, cowboy boots, tall boots, polo boots, whatever, um, in footwear that is really not helping the process either, right? Like that's also throwing you out of whack, right? And especially, you were using the Nick Dowers example. You go out to Nevada, and all those guys have the buckaroo heel that's slicked under. Like those boots are even harder to work in than your normal rancher heel that you see at your, boot barn or whatever.
Yeah.
So, like for me, again, going off my anecdotal experiences, one of the best things I did to make myself feel better, and this wasn't even for riding, but it was just like I'd be walking around the horse show or I'd be helping my wife when she's showing. Um, when I finally got a comfortable shoe, and I know this is, again, it's just for me. I don't talk about this publicly a lot. That's why I have to keep saying like this disclaimer, because I don't really like getting into the fitness realm because everybody's so opinionated about it.
Well, mate, you've got
Um,
more good information than a lot of them, so you should continue.
yeah. So what helped me was finding a shoe, like a work boot that was basically kind of more minimalist and had like a very wide toe box.
Hmm.
Um, and I, like I said, I pole vaulted and I kind of grew up in like the track and field community. Um, so the minimalist shoes like take it on the chin a lot. And I'm not suggesting people go out and try to like train for a 5K or a marathon in minimalist shoes, because I think that's a bad idea. But I'm talking about like me walking around just like doing doing the Cowboys, like changing the tire, carrying a bale of hay, things like that. When I oddly enough, when I started really working on all this internal hip rotation, what I found was when I was barefoot, my toes would spread more than they ever
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
before. Um, and I needed a shoe to accommodate that. So I got a shoe with a wide toe box, just kind of a work boot, like a Chelsea boot with a wide toe box. And um, I could walk all day at the horse show as soon as I got those shoes, and my back didn't hurt. Now my feet didn't hurt, but I could tell they were tired because I think my feet were doing more work of like absorbing impact of me walking around than they had before. But it wasn't like a pain. It was like my feet had just been to the gym or
They've done
something.
a workout. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
look,
So,
and you've hit it on the head here. But so one goes back to, I'll try and keep this kind of non-sciencey so people stay awake, but it goes back to the ground reaction force thing. That's the key to the Ferrari. Unless you are able to experience ground reaction force through your foot, you can't switch on anything really further up the chain, and your body defaults to bad patterns. That's the first thing. And equestrian boots are particularly bad for two reasons. One, they tend to have a narrow toe box, like that squeezes your toes over each other. And that's the base of support. So your big toe, your little toe, and your heel are kind of like a 3-point balance. And they all have a huge amount of neurological feedback up the body, right up until the opposite. You can have a bad right ankle and it'll affect your left shoulder or left neck.
mhm.
So that has huge inferences further up the chain. And then the second thing, going back to what we were saying about riders already having a pelvis that's tipped forwards, is if you have a big heel on your boot, we already know you're bad at absorbing the force of gravity and are therefore on the front of your foot. If you have a heel on the boot, it tips you further on the front of your foot and further asks for that kind of arch through your lower back. So you're just training these bad patterns. And, one of my other throwaway comments is practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent.
Hmm.
So if you're permanently in a bad position, that's where you default to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like you said, then it just compounds and like your spine starts to go like that and you get more and more rounded over time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which, I suppose going back to what I was saying about the equestrian light training thing, and this for me is maybe for no one else is kind of a similar deal, but you see people trying to fix balance issues by standing on unstable surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Again, all you're doing there is grooving an unstable pattern. So maybe you become stable in an unstable pattern, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to add anything to your performance under load.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way that, you know, if you spend your life walking around in a pair of buckaroo heels, don't be surprised if you get very good at walking around in buckaroo heels, but if you go try run a 5K in some trainers, your knees hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that, and I think a lot of people have caught on to that, at least trainers. Like most trainers I know, as soon as they're off the horse for the day, they change into some kind of like different footwear.
Oh man, I had that at Fort Worth this year. Like, you know, I'm out there working with a lot of the pros that I work with online and trying to make a good impression. And you want to look, you want to look presentable, you want to look smart. So I'm walking around in my cowboy boots all day. I reckon that lasted probably 2-3 days before
Yeah.
everyone else. So I was wandering around. And my girlfriend hates them because, let's be honest, they're not the best looking shoes. But walking around in my barefoot Vivos or something like that, which is not a good look. But man, my feet felt better, and so did the rest of my body.
Yeah. Man, it's amazing. It's amazing how much you can just free up everything by letting your foot go to work, like
Well,
absorbing impact.
this is it. Is no matter what sport you're doing, restoring function to the body basically comes back to restoring gait patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can use any one of these examples for that, but let's for this point use the cowboy boot or the polo boot or whatever it is. That is getting in the way of your gait pattern, which is fine because you're going to have to wear that for your sport.
Mm-hmm.
But make sure you're doing your hygiene afterwards to make sure that function is restored, and that could be as simple as just walking around barefoot a bit when you get home.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you should. Have you ever heard of the boots called lettuce pickers?
No.
Okay. You should look into lettuce pickers. They're basically a cowboy boot without a heel.
Okay.
They're real popular kind of in that some of the buckaroo guys, most of the guys I know that do it are kind of in that like Wyoming, Montana area. Um, I I've never had a pair, and you got to be willing to ride all day without a heel. But a lot of times they have a big Monel stirrup, like the big 5-inch stirrups. So um, the chances of your foot going through your stirrup is greatly reduced anyway. But I know a lot of guys who are like working ranch cowboys. Um, they work like if they go to town for a roping or something, they'll wear their buckaroo heel, but their daily driver boot is a lettuce picker, which is basically a cowboy boot with a flat bottom.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, dude, if you're down there in Fort Worth, like half the guys got their jeans rolled up and are wearing like tennis shoes anyway, right? So,
100%. I do
yeah,
laugh about that.
yeah, absolutely, dude. You figure that one out really quick. Like,
All on scooters, which is something I might need to invest in.
oh, dude, yeah. My wife's birthday was back in August, and I got her one of those high boy scooters for the horse
Yeah.
shows, and that was the best investment. Just
Yeah.
being able to cruise around on that thing, that'll make your back feel better as having a scooter take you
Oh,
everywhere.
there we go. I've been spreading bad advice. Just ignore everything I've said and buy a scooter. You'll be better off.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, cool, man. This has been really fun to have this conversation. I won't take your whole day, and I've got to go now sit on a bunch of horses and think about how unbalanced I am and what's wrong with my body. I'm sure I'll be hyper aware for the rest of the day now.
Well, mate, no, thank you. And thank you for adjusting to fit the British time schedule. I appreciate it. Probably better off from
Yeah.
doing it at night. I'm not sure how good I'd be then. And no, thanks. It's been fun being on here and, especially running the podcast yourself now. Keep it going, but we enjoy it over here. And we've got fans in places you may not be aware of. And, if you'd like help with anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you out directly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So again, let's go over before we sign off, kind of go over everything you offer. And if there's anyone listening here, if they want to get a hold of you or how you might be able to help them, can you just kind of list your services and where they might be able to find your brand and stuff?
Sure. So easiest place to find me is on Instagram. I've got Facebook as well, but it's terrible. The Rider Movement. And then my website is theridermove.com. I offer a full spectrum of programs, right from, startup programs for people that are looking to improve their riding, improve their biomechanics, and reduce their pain that you can pay for to download, right up to working together with athletes one-on-one. That tends to be something I do less of and charge a bit of a premium for because there's only so many of those people I can commit to at a given time. But yeah, our mission is to make people enjoy their sport more, enjoy their riding more, and hopefully have a positive contribution to performance, career longevity of both human and horse.
Yeah. Awesome. That's cool, man. Well, I'll have to get on there and check it out. Might have to try one of your programs.
You let me know, John. I'm sure we can sort you out.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks, Gus. Don't hang up, but we are going to stop recording. And for everyone listening, thank you guys. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, guys.